Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Robert, I'm curious to see what you're doing. Tell me your strategy for buying rentals.
So basically, we look for areas that have obviously low purchase prices with high comparable rents. A lot of the areas we look at are like Valdosta and Columbus, Georgia, which have military bases, universities, just a steady, solid pool of renters available so that we can keep our properties leased.
The idea of buying a really cheap property sounds great. And on paper, a lot of times the returns look incredible. But in reality, those properties don't always perform as well as you had hoped because a lot of times those properties aren't in the best area, or maybe they're older properties and they're going to require more maintenance. But in Robert's case, he's buying properties that really aren't that old. They're in a pretty good area, and he's making really good returns. So on the show today, we're going to get more details on exactly what he's doing. We'll take a look at his numbers, and we'll figure out how he's doing this remotely. Robert doesn't live in the area where he's buying properties, so we'll see how he's making everything work. Joining us on the podcast today is Robert Washington. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Robert. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Robert, when you say cheap, what are we talking? Give me like a price range of what you've paid for properties.
So the cheapest would be $45,000 for a single family. Okay. It did need a little bit of rehab to start with, but not a ton, basically just a new roof and a little bit of cosmetic rehab. We got a duplex for $75,000 in the same city. So yeah, under 50 grand a door is pretty cheap.
Under 50 grand a door. And then how much would that rent for?
So the $45,000 house rented for $995, and that's pretty much where we're at. I think we're at $995,000. The duplex rented for $700 aside.
Wow. Okay, so you're right at the 2% rule, which is pretty amazing when you think most people can't find the 1% rule today. So you're getting really good returns. Now, how far away do you live from this area where your properties are?
It's about a 3.5 hour drive.
Is that an issue at all, being so far away?
Not necessarily. It's just close enough to where we could justify a road trip if something comes up. But I mean, ideally it would be closer, but still close enough, I would say.
And are you self-managing it, or do you have a manager?
The ones in Valdosta, we do have a property manager. The ones in Columbus, Georgia, which is a little further away, are actually self-managed.
Okay. And all right, so if you look at the properties, how old are we talking?
Usually like 1950s.
1950s. Okay, so that's not crazy old. And the properties, you mentioned at the beginning that you're just doing cosmetic work, so you're not doing full rehabs when you bought these properties.
Correct. It's basically just minor cosmetic. Like one was a new roof and a little bit of kitchen work. And the other basically like some flooring and kitchen work.
So it sounds like there's pretty good employment in the area.
There is, yeah. It's pretty solid and steady. Like I was saying, there's a military base in each city, which is a pretty big driver for the economies in those areas, and as well as schools, hospitals.
Now, the trade-off a lot of times when you find really cheap properties is they don't appreciate, but it sounds like your properties have appreciated, right?
They have. Yeah, they've essentially doubled in the last couple of years or so, which is a little surprising.
Why do you think they're so cheap? Like it almost doesn't, it almost sounds like it's mispriced.
We thought it was mispriced when we bought it. Now the prices are kind of catching up to where or at least close to where they should be. So I think, I don't know if the word got out, but it's definitely corrected itself somewhat.
Well, let's take a look at one of your deals here and see how the numbers all shake out. So the property that we're going to be talking about, can you tell me about the property?
Yeah, it's a 3-1. It's a little over 1,000 square feet. We bought it for $45,000. It was a cash deal at the end of 2021.
Okay.
And
how did you find the property?
I believe we found that just through searching on Zillow.
Wow. Okay. So the properties that you bought, have they all been listed on the MLS?
I would say I can't think of any that weren't, to be honest.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So it's not like you're doing any kind of crazy marketing or finding off market deals. These are properties that are for sale and you're just buying them.
Right. Yeah. The
Awesome.
only ones that we haven't found would just be an agent saying, "Hey, just listed this property. It's great. You guys have closed this before. Let's do it again."
Mm-hmm. Okay. Awesome. All right. So you paid $45,000 for it, and so you needed just some cosmetic updates to it.
Yeah, it needed a new roof, which we did right away, and then some minor cosmetic like flooring and kitchen work.
Okay. And how much did all that cost?
So the roof was $4,500, and we spent about $3,000, maybe just a little over on the
okay. End. So like 7, maybe $8,000, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Okay. So all right. So you're all in with the purchase price and the rehab, about $54,000. And what is that rented for?
It's rented at $995.
$995. Awesome. Now, so you bought this with cash. Now, is that because, like, is that your strategy to buy it with cash, or is that the only option? Because I know a lot of times banks don't want to finance such a small loan.
We actually did have financing lined up for that one. It was definitely like a non-QM private lender on that one.
Okay.
But we ended up having to close in cash because we ran into a pretty unique situation with the agent. She was actually doing both sides, the buy and the sale, and she had a lot of unfortunate things happen in her life. So we ended up getting to the closing date. We couldn't get a hold of her. So the lender was out, and basically the seller was like, "Look, if you guys want this, you got to pay cash. If not, I'm putting it right back on the market." So,
wow. Okay. So something happened with the agent, and what I guess she wasn't communicating with you leading up to the closing.
Right. Unfortunately, her husband passed away about a week before we closed, and she wasn't communicating with anybody, the title company, us, the seller. So, and it was understandable, but we were just kind of like in limbo.
Yeah.
And essentially, it was the very end of the year. So the seller was like, "Hey, sorry, we know it's not your fault, but if you want it, you're going to have to close it now." So essentially we just had to close like that day in cash.
Wow. Okay. And the lender did, okay. So the lender wasn't able to close quickly, and you had to close quickly. And the only way to do that was cash.
Right. So it was like the last week of December. So I think everybody was out of the office with them, and it just kind of skeleton crew. So they couldn't move quick enough.
Have you thought about refining to get your cash out, or are you fine keeping it in the property?
So it's definitely an option. Basically, if we find the right deal and need the liquidity, we'll refi it. But as of right now, it's just all positive equity.
Okay. Yep. Nothing wrong with having options. That's great. Okay. So it's rented at $995. You have no mortgage payment. How much are your property taxes?
I would say just under $800 a year. So was that like $65, $70 a month?
Yeah. Okay. And then for your property insurance?
It's about 120, I believe.
120. Okay. So you've got your 66 or about 66 a month in taxes, about 120 in insurance. Do you have any other fixed expenses that you're paying for, water or anything else?
Nope, that's all on the tenant.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
But we do set aside some reserves for like maintenance and CapEx.
Yeah. So how much do you set aside? Is it like a fixed amount, or do you go by a percentage?
So the amount of reserves we keep in there is larger than like just that percentage. But I usually like to factor in like 7% for maintenance and 7% for
Okay.
CapEx.
And then how do you actually do that? Do you like, is that 7% you're setting aside? Is that just a number you have on your spreadsheet that you say, okay, when the rents come in, we're going to put 7% aside? Or in reality, do you put the whole thing aside, the whole rent amount?
We put the whole rent amount aside.
Okay.
Basically, so we have several properties kind of going into that same account. And the goal or idea is just build up enough profit to buy another one and just kind of keep the process going.
So if you look at your actual expenses that you have in a year, does it come out to be about the 7% over the course of a year?
I would say that typically is the average across all of the properties.
Okay.
It might be slightly lower. But
okay. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So the money is just sitting there. So you have the cash from this rental, whatever profit you make from your other properties, everything is sitting there. Is there a plan for the money? Like, are you just going to build up a savings so that you have some security there, or do you have a plan for that at some point in the future?
So I would say we want to keep some reserves in there for rainy day funds, basically, or large CapEx, unexpected expenditures.
Yeah.
But typically the goal is for the bulk of it to be used as a down payment on another property.
Okay. Awesome. And I think that's an awesome goal. I mean, you get to a point where your cash flow is buying you more rentals. I mean, I think when you've won the rental game. So tell me about the rest of your portfolio. What does it look like?
So there's single families and duplexes, basically in Valdosta and Columbus, Georgia. And there's a duplex as a 2%er, single family we bought just last year. So that's a little over a 1%er. But yeah, I would say pretty standard stuff, kind of similar to this deal.
And the reason that you're buying in this area is, I mean, obviously it's cheap. The numbers make sense. You're doing well with it. Is it just like really difficult to find cash flow where you live?
It is. So I actually am a investor focused agent down in the Tampa area. And yeah, the only like real cash flow we see here is for stuff like short-term rentals. Mm-hmm. The market here just isn't cash flow positive for most annual rentals as of right now.
Right. Well, what about insurance? I always hear that insurance rates in Florida are crazy high and that they're going up a lot just with all the hurricanes that we've had. Like, is that making it difficult or even more difficult to make the numbers work locally?
It definitely has. So the last couple of years, rates have steadily increased. But this year, we've actually seen them like flatten and even come down very marginally, like 1% or 2% on some premiums. Again, that's kind of to be determined, I would say.
Right. So is there any downside to investing in the cheap rentals? I mean, it seems you don't have a lot of cash tied up. You know, if you're looking at a 20% down payment on a $50,000 house, it's not a lot of money you're putting into it. It seems like the properties are appreciating. You're getting good cash flow. There's not a lot of maintenance. I don't really see a downside. Is there anything I'm missing? Is there any negative to investing in these properties that you're buying?
I would say typically the tenants are going to be a little bit lower income, so you have a little more vacancy risk. Mm-hmm. Okay. And sometimes that can lead to maintenance issues as well, but we haven't really seen that. So that's the biggest downside. The appreciation we've seen has been unexpected because typically the lower income properties are going to appreciate less, but I think we just kind of caught the right side of a wave on these.
Right. Now, what about the vacancy? When you have a vacancy, is it hard to fill?
Not really. It's actually been surprisingly pretty easy.
And that's just because there's so much with the military bases and there's a lot of jobs in the area.
Correct.
Have you had any problems with tenants? Like, have they done any crazy stuff?
We did have one who put in her notice that she was going to vacate and terminate the lease early. And then a few days later, miraculously, her house was shot with a gun. Yeah. So it was a duplex, and it only hit her side of the duplex when no one else was home. So we don't know exactly what happened, but it seemed like they were trying to get out of breaking the lease and have it on that record.
But she had already notified you that she was leaving, and then she allegedly shot the house.
Yeah, I don't know if she did it or maybe somebody was mad at her and coming for her, and that's why she was leaving. I don't know the ins and outs of it. But
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, do you think she was trying to make the case that it's not safe to live here? So I need with cause to break the lease.
Yeah, that's definitely the route she was taking with the property manager.
So explain to me your strategy for finding tenants when you live far away. Like, how are you doing that? Like, how do you do showings?
So we actually have a brokerage, and this was more in the past. We did a lot of remote leasing for some nationwide property managers. So we kind of had that experience under our belt. So we actually have a lockbox system that basically changes for each showing. So we've gotten pretty good at the remote leasing game, basically.
So then when you place the ad, do people call you and then you give them like a pre-screening before you give them the code to get in the property?
We do. We just verify their ID.
Okay.
And do like a quick background check. Nothing thorough. We don't really do the thorough background check until they apply. Okay.
All right. So you kind of check them out, make sure they're real, find out who they really are. And then you give them the remote code to get in. Are you using Tenant Turner for that?
No, we're not. It's actually a lockbox system called a code box.
Okay.
And essentially it has, I think it's like 16 pre-programmed codes for each day. And once the code that you give out is used, it goes away after like 30 minutes. So they can basically access the lockbox once a day.
Have you had any problems with people maybe forgetting to lock the property up when they leave or doing any kind of vandalism to the property?
Not vandalism. We had an oven stolen once, which was one. Yeah.
And
that's about it.
The oven was stolen while the property was being shown?
Correct. It was basically right after we bought it and before the first tenant was placed.
So were you able to track it back to the person that stole it?
I don't think we were, because even if you give out just one code a day, if you've had 5 showings and nobody reports it, then it's hard to pin it on one person.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like you need a camera or something just to have the evidence that someone stole it.
We thought about that, but you never know that maybe they left the back door unlocked and just took it out the back because it was right next to the back door.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess that's the one negative, but the upside is it saves you from having to drive to the property.
Exactly. So we have kind of like handymen and different runner types, basically, where we can actually just overnight the mailbox to them, or not the mailbox, the lockbox, and give it to them.
Okay. So you mail it to the handyman, he puts it on the property, and then you personally talk to the applicants before they go to the showing.
Correct.
And then when you actually find somebody, when you actually find a tenant, can you walk me through what your screening process is?
Yeah. Basically, we're just looking for like violent criminal records or previous evictions, bankruptcies, things like that. And obviously credit score, as well as income. So we're basically just making sure that it's somebody that isn't a violent criminal, can pay their rent, and hasn't been evicted recently. And those are our big no-nos, basically.
How important do you think credit is?
It's important, but we try to remember too that a lot of renters have probably had some recent struggles, and it might be why they're not buying. So we can even go down to like a 550, 600 credit score, but typically we just ask for a higher deposit in those cases.
As Robert mentioned earlier, he is a investor-friendly agent in the Tampa area. If you're looking for a house hack in that area or maybe a vacation rental, reach out to Robert. I think he will take great care of you. I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 497. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley. She's a nationwide lender. She has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you. If you want to find out more or you want to set up a time to talk to Chaley personally, you can track her down at ridgelendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you hit the follow button. I put out a new episode every single Tuesday, and if you're following the show, you'll get notified as soon as the next episode comes out. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.